So we mentioned before that in the realm of happiness and meaning, it's very hard to have meaning if life is meaningless. And if you can't access that meaning and you're just making it up, well, it's equally meaningless. So there has to be some window into this realm of meaning. And we mentioned before that there's one historic event never repeated in the history of the world afterwards called Mount Sinai, where God gave to the Jewish people the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, which we have on a scroll in synagogue. And that has been the secret of the Jews, the guiding force of how we live is that realm. Tonight I'm going to illuminate how do we make that practical and what does that mean? You read the Torah and that all of a sudden gives you a way to live. I, in my life, have never opened up the Ark, taken out that scroll, and read it and studied from it. So what does that mean? So, and we know that there's a concept called, there's the written law and the oral, the verbal tradition about how to understand that. That was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. That means not only was there a written law given, but an oral tradition was given as well as to how to interpret that. So if it says, write these things on the doorposts of your home, that's vague. What does that mean? But it was given to Moses the wording and the interpretation of how you make it practical. The first part is called the written law. The second part is called the oral law. In Hebrew, it's called Torah Sheba'al Peh. That is in the verbal domain. So the question that any intelligent person would have to ask is why? Why give it over in these two manners? Just either give it to me all written down or all verbally. Why is it the two realms? Why do we need these two realms? What does that represent? First question. And the second question is that we know that a shift took place in Jewish history, that after the destruction of the Second Temple, approximately the year 70, soon afterwards, Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, wrote down the Mishnah, which is the writing down of the oral law. But prior to that, you were not allowed to write it down for public usage. You have your own little notes, but it had to be in this oral tradition. Why? In other words, why does it have to be? Not only that it was passed down orally, but it had to be, and you weren't allowed to write it down. Oh, but then a new thing came after the destruction, now it's written down. So God obviously knows the past and the future, so how do we fit that into the purpose of the world? That there's a moment of, oh, don't write it down. Can I write this down? Okay, now you can write this down. That's just a random shift that happened based on a reality, or maybe that has what to do with the narrative of human history. So the concept goes like this, that all of us, in a simple way, we're all here to complete the process of life, to complete ourselves. The goal is not just to maintain who you are, but to take who you are and who you want to be. I have who I want to be and I have who I am. And how do I deal with the gap in between? Well, I take who I am and who I want to be, and I align myself towards where I want to go, and I incrementally change who I am towards that realm. So in other words, everyone is alive, and we're all not going to just kill ourselves tomorrow. We're here to maintain life. We want to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. We don't want to be wrecked. We want to make ourselves better. Can you do it tomorrow? No. I have to do it incrementally. Where is life lived? In the small things. Greatness is about how you live your life in a practical manner. That's our general goal. Now, there's for all of us, there are ideas that we receive. Oh, that's true. And then how we make those ideas practical, that is our ownership. How you own that concept, how you internalize that is really the expression of your personality. They bold, underline, and italics the following idea. Is your personality what you do, or is your personality how you do what you do? In other words, do you want to? We are all unique. We're all similar. We all have the same needs, and yet we're all very unique. So there is a concept of my uniqueness. is the expression of my uniqueness in what I do, or is it more subtly in how I do what I do? Meaning that, okay, I love your friend like you love yourself. I have to care about you, but I know that I'm unique, you're unique. So it's not what I do, but it's how I do what I do. Or as the Motown song goes, it's the way you do the things you do. How you do it is it's the way you do the things you do. And that's where subtle greatness comes out. So there's the general truth, and then there's the interpretation and internalization of that truth. And that is how your personality shines. I know that Halloween is coming up, which is usually show the other side of your personality day, in which people, hey, what are you going to be? Oh, I'm going to be this. Like, okay, there is probably some psychoanalysis that can be done about your desire to dress in that certain way. Certain people make me completely nervous in that area. It's like, okay, bloody killer. I'm sure you're not a bloody killer, but I'm not going to hang out with you and have you babysit with my kids. The concept is that, oh, yeah, you're expressing yourself. Yeah, because you like Freddy Krueger. That's where you are. All right, I hear that. That's the only way to express yourself in a way that gathers attention, or maybe the expression of who you are is in a more subtle manner. So we believe that internalizing, interpretation and internalizing is the expression of who you are. So it goes like this, that when Moses and the Jewish people received the Torah in 1313 BCE, we received the written law, the basic idea, and we also received the oral tradition of how to activate that. Why did they not write that down? Because you cannot replace human discussion. Where do we live life? Not in a text written thing that you see. You live life in what you hear and what you interpret. No app will ever replace human relationships. Ever. Siri is nice, but there's no replacement for conversation. Speech is an amazing concept, because speech is not only what distinguishes us from animals, but speech is what connects us in the deepest way possible. Meaning, we're better than animals or different than animals because we have intelligence in speech, but that's not just to outrun them, it's showing a qualitative ability for us to unite. When you speak with someone, and there's a back and forth, that is hitting you in the home zone. Where you actually live is not in a theoretical idea, but where you live is in a realer inner place than we're aware of. So when we receive the Torah, no, don't write it down, let's discuss it. Because when we discuss it back and forth, we're able to internalize that idea and make it real. Okay, that went on for a very long time period. And then, after the destruction of the temple, we were all being dispersed, a decision was made that even though we shouldn't write it down, we should keep it verbal, let's have notes. And that notes are called Mishnah. So when we study Torah, we study it from this point of Mishnah. The word Mishnah comes from the word Shana, to go over and to relearn. So the Mishnah, we wrote it down, and it became summary points. And then eventually, about 200 years later, we wrote down the Gemara, which is the completion of that realm of making it final. Okay, so what changed? And how does that fit into the purpose and history of the world? So the concept goes like this, is that all of us, hopefully, were raised by people. Another thing that cannot be replaced in child rearing, there is no app for raising children. And children are raised best by parents. Slowly, there is a movement to outsource the raising of children. Many people in my generation have little old iPads that they don't need anymore, a bunch of junk, and they use that for Curious George for bedtime. Here you go. I'm not going to read you Curious George. Watch Curious George. Listen to Curious George. People have that. Kids, you could outsource, just like you could outsource parenting, have them go to childcare. You could outsource bedtime. One of the most important points is in child rearing is bedtime. We outsource it. Really, truthfully, the best way to actually grow up is to be raised by parents. Now, eventually, the goal of a parent is to create independence by the child. So in other words, you want to give them enough ideas that they can now do that on their own. So you ride a bike with them, you run on the side, you hold them, but eventually if they're 18 and you're running around with a bit, okay, I'm almost there, okay, we're going to do it. Let go, Ma, let go. I'm okay. You have to let them go at a certain point. Teach them how to walk. You have to let go of their hands and have them walk closer to you. Eventually, the ultimate goal is when you have it and you show signs of independence. The movement of when we had the Torah, the written law, and just it was passed down orally, and there was a change, a shift in approximately the year 150 in the Common Era, in which we wrote it down. What does that mean, we wrote it down? Is that in this realm, we're no longer receiving transmission from above to below, but we're receiving, or we're connecting, we're transcending from below to above. That when we write it down, we're becoming the authors. We're taking over. We're showing that we have power in this world, and we're connecting on our own. In the beginning of the history, we receive the Torah, here's the instruction, here's the oral tradition about how you write a mezuzah, where you put a mezuzah, and that came down until the destruction of the Second Temple. And then we wrote things down, and we continue to write. And every single year, in all the corners of Jewish life, new books come out. Every generation, we have our own interpretation. How does that fit into the history of the world? Because that's the point. Ultimately, the point is to get truth clear and to make that truth your own, to have that truth guide you from within, that you yourself should ultimately connect. And that's why even today, even though we write it down, you can have an app, people learn the Talmud, they do a page a day, and then they make a grand party at the end. There's an iPad thing, you could learn one page of Talmud a day. We all learn Talmud, but it's still in the oral tradition, meaning we still can't live without each other. And here's the subtle point I want you to take home, is because when you get together with an individual and you discuss something, you think of ideas at the moment of discussion that you never thought of before. Let me say that again. When you are in a room with a person having a discussion, you think of ideas that you did not think of before. Something clicks at that moment that's magical, that cannot be replaced by anything electronic. Something happens in human connection in a subtle way. That's the zone that truth has to hit. That's the area that we live. And the realm of the survival of the Jewish people is because, as I showed you from the last time, the flow chart of I heard it from my rabbi, I heard it from his rabbi, going down, there was a conversation that took place, and a conversation and an interpretation. And when you have a conversation and interpretation, all going to rhyme, you have internalization. You make it real. What's the ultimate point? It's not just to know things. We don't care about being smart. It's to be things. The point is not to know things, it's to be things. Who are you being now? Okay, you might know, yeah, I know that if I find something, I should really return it. Do you know that, or are you that person? Have you become that realm? Guess what? The only way you will become that realm is if you internalize it. And the only way you internalize it is if you speak it. And the only way you could speak it is if you have somebody to speak with. Sure, if you're crazy, you could speak to yourself. But ultimate speech happens when you have an actual interaction with somebody that's listening. The word Shema in Hebrew means to listen, and it means to understand, and it means to be at one. If you want to know the crux of all human relationships, it lies in the realm of listening. Someone's speaking, so that means they feel who you are. And how do you connect to that person that's speaking? By putting yourself in a position of listening, which means I understand what you're saying and I'm at one with it. Shema means to hear, to understand, and be at one with it. Torah Shebal Peh, the verbal Torah, is the zone where we become whole. And we only become whole with each other when we speak with each other. The back and forth, if you go to a traditional Jewish institute of schooling, it's not a quiet library. People are arguing with each other. I wake up every morning and I drive to a place called the yeshiva and I have a study partner and we argue. We don't just agree on it because we want to work it out. You would see us be like, oh guys, come on, why can't we all just get along? Why are you guys No, we're trying to work it out. The magical zone of internalization happens in shemiya, in hearing, listening, and being at one. And that's why, especially in our generation, we have the greatest threat to civilization. Nuclear war? No. Some guy from Utah getting elected? No. The concept of the greatest threat to civilization is we no longer listen to each other. The concept, I love electronic communication. I love texting. I'm going to be 5 minutes late. I don't want to call you and tell you I'm going to be 5 minutes late. I just want to text that to you. I don't want to get too involved. It's a great concept. Awesome. Saves me tons of time and emotional energy. But the real threat is that if I'm talking to you and I'm like, I'm totally listening. No, you're totally not listening. You're half listening. Okay, half listening is not bad, but half listening is not being at one with you. And if you're not at one with someone, then you have cut yourself off from the point of internalization. The goal in life is to own it, and you can only own it individually if you have a scenario of connection with people. The end.